Oh, hey, what's popping? What are you guys doing in my house? That's totally my house. Well, since you guys are here, I did want to talk about Dragon Ball for about 15 to 20 minutes, so let's get to it. When it comes to anime that most people have heard of, it's hard to find a series better known and better loved than Dragon Ball. Goku and friends and Yamcha have influenced dozens of classic shows and comics, inspired professional athletes, and are responsible for that one old-ass meme where Goku's power is over 8,999. First appearing in 1984 as a serialized manga written and drawn by the legendary Akira Toriyama for Weekly Shonen Jump, Dragon Ball began as the story of a monkey-tailed boy on a quest to collect 7 mythical wish-granting orange balls. Over the past 3 decades, the series has grown to be one of the top grossing media franchises of all time. Dragon Ball gave way to Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, Dragon Ball Super, and more, including the recent epic Dragon Balls to the Wall theatrical film, Dragon Ball Super Broly, where a local man is just too angry to die. And just like Ghost in the Shell, Dragon Ball has never been made into a live-action movie. Dragon Ball is certainly best known as a manga and anime, it's also one of the top-selling and highest-grossing video game franchises still active today. To date, there have been over 50 million Dragon Ball video games sold, a massive amount that beats out classical gaming franchises such as Street Fighter, Mega Man, and Kirby. People don't want to just watch Goku. We want to be him. In fact, counting arcade, home console, handheld, and mobile releases, there have been roughly 100 Dragon Ball games produced since 1986. And here's the list. Dragon Ball Pilaf no Gyakishu, Dragon Ball Taiketsu Son Goku, Dragon Ball Z The Legend, Dragon Ball GT Final Bout, Dragon Ball Z Collectible CD Picture Card, Dragon Ball Z Burst Limit, Dragon Ball Origins, Dr. Slump, Ariel-chan, Dragon Ball Z Infinite World, Jump Force, Super Dragon Ball Heroes, World Mission, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. Whew, yeah, goddamn, I need a sensu bean.
While plenty of North American and European video game fans likely grew up with series like The Legacy of Goku for the Game Boy Advance or Dragon Ball Z Budokai on the PlayStation 2.
There are dozens of Dragon Ball video games that have never seen the light of day outside of Japan. It's these games that I'm here to talk about today. The retro Dragon Ball games you may have missed. The good, the bad, and the ugly of Japanese exclusives, as well as a localized title that went horribly wrong. So, this is the early retro history of Dragon Ball video games. Less than 2 years after the debut of the Dragon Ball manga, in February of 1986, the Weekly Shonen Jump series premiered as an animated television show, produced by the famed animation studio Toei. In August of that same year, with its popularity on the rise, the very first Dragon Ball video games were released in the form of 2 dinky standalone LCD handhelds, named Dragon Ball Pilaf no Gyakishu and Dragon Ball Taiketsu Son Goku. Each Game & Watch-esque handheld featured multiple different game modes revolving around the Dragon Ball storyline at the time. The creator of these handhelds, Epoch, was also responsible for developing and publishing the very first home console Dragon Ball game for their Japanese exclusive Super Cassette Vision system. Dubbed Dragon Ball Dragon Daihikyo, or Dragon Ball Dragon's Great Exploration, the game featured an interesting top-down shoot-'em-up gameplay. The 8-bit title put players in the shoes of the heroic Goku as he rode his iconic yellow cloud, the Flying Nimbus, through wave after wave of oncoming baddies. It was only by using his trusty power pole and small energy blast that Goku could take down incoming enemies and reach his final destination. To this day, Dragon Daihikyo and its 2 handheld predecessors stand as the only games in Dragon Ball history to have 0 involvement from beloved Japanese toy manufacturer and game developer Bandai, known today as Namco Bandai. Unfortunately for Epoch, the Dragon Ball brand wouldn't be exclusive to the Super Cassette Vision for long. A team at Tosei, T-O-S-E, Software had also been hard at work on their own Dragon Ball title for Nintendo's hit home console, the Family Computer, or Famicom. Published by the aforementioned Bandai, it would hit store shelves just 2 months after Dragon Daihikyo in November of 1986. Bandai's game Dragon Ball Shenlong no Nazo, or Dragon Ball Shenlong's Riddle, was a bit more in line with the plot of the hit manga and anime, at least at its start. The game's 14 levels gave players the chance to adventure across multiple different settings, including a mountain, a desert, and even outer space, as they defeated roving enemies, collected items, and pummeled their way past an onslaught of recurring bosses. Though the levels were linear, they featured a sense of exploration somewhat similar to the original Legend of Zelda, which had been released for the Famicom's Disk Drive add-on just 9 months prior. While North American audiences did get their hands on The Legend of Zelda in 1986, they still had not been introduced to the masterpiece that was Dragon Ball. This posed a major problem for Bandai, who wanted to release Shenlong no Nazo on North America's new Nintendo Entertainment System. They had a choice to make: leave the game as it was and hope American players accepted it, or localize the hell out of it. And I bet you can guess which option they went with. By the spring of 1988, Shenlong no Nazo had been transformed into Dragon Power. Bandai's entrusted the localization of this game to their Bandai America branch, and the team had certainly taken some liberties with the story and characters and gameplay. Bandai America has decided to lean into the source material for Dragon Ball itself, tweaking the gameplay to mildly represent Journey to the West, a classic Chinese epic tale that's often known in other parts of the world as simply Monkey. This alternate title makes more sense when you see what they did to poor Goku, who went from a boy with a monkey tail to a monkey who kind of looks like a boy. This character design change was even more bewildering when you take a closer look at the box art for the game. Apparently, this overly tan gentleman in the white gi is supposed to be Goku, who normally looks like this, and who looks more like this in the actual game the box is promoting. It's baffling. Baffling stuff. Goku's design and terrible box art aside, there were also a host of other changes made to make Dragon Power less confusing and more appropriate for younger players. Instead of scouring the land for the 7 Dragon Balls, players were in search of the 7 Crystal Balls. Goku's iconic Kamehameha attack was unfortunately rebranded as the Wind Wave, which sounds more like a devastating fart than a powerful attack. Or maybe both. Shoutouts to Kook the Boo. While Goku did keep his name, Bulma became Nora, Yamcha became Lancer, and Oolong became Pudgy. While those characters were simply renamed, Master Roshi received an entire 8-bit makeover, going from a bald hermit wearing sunglasses and a turtle shell to a robed martial art master with a flowing white beard. This change also came with a new, far less creepy attitude towards Bulma, I mean Nora. As anyone who's seen Dragon Ball can attest, Master Roshi is often portrayed as a dirty old man who's constantly trying to sneak a peek or cop a feel when he comes across a beautiful lady. In early chapters of the manga and episodes of the television series, Master Roshi asks to see Bulma's underwear, a plot point that also shows up in the original Shenlong no Nazo. To correct this somewhat uncomfortable interaction in a game intended for children, Bandai America changed the request to see Bulma's unmentionables into a desire for sandwiches. Because who wouldn't want a nice lunch, right? While the gameplay of Dragon Power was nearly identical to that of Shenlong no Nazo, 4 of the 14 levels, each comprised of a different round of martial arts tournaments, were completely cut out from the game. But hey, even with its cut content and butchered story, Dragon Power was still featured in the very first issue of the now defunct Nintendo Power magazine in the summer of 1988. It may have simply been a half-a-page preview, but Dragon Ball, disguised as Dragon Power, was there from the very start. Surprisingly, Shenlong no Nazo was also localized for one other country a year later: France. The European powerhouse was the first region outside of Japan to officially dub the Dragon Ball anime in 1988, and its popularity led to the release of the NES title, now Dragon Ball Le Secret du Dragon, 2 years later. Unlike the North American version, there were virtually no changes from the Japanese original outside of converted language. They even got the same box art with all the cool characters. Meanwhile, we were stuck with Kung Fu David. Moving on, Shenlong no NAZO was followed by 2 more Dragon Ball games for the Famicom in 1988 and 1989, respectively. Both Dragon Ball Daimao Fukatsu and Dragon Ball 3 Gokuden decided to scrap the action-adventure gameplay of their predecessor, replacing it with an interesting card-based RPG system. Instead of wandering about a vast overworld, Goku was confined to a game board, which he could only move a certain number of spots at a time. Once he had moved, players could gather information or fight opponents to further their adventures. When in battle, players were dealt a random hand of attack cards, which they would rearrange to form their battle plans for that round. Whichever player played the most powerful card landed a hit on their opponent, whereas similarly powered attacks ended in a draw. It was somewhat slow and repetitive.
Caleb, leave this in.
It was a somewhat slow and repetitive format, but at least there were little animations up top showing how the actions unfolded with each card. Neither Daimao Fukatsu nor Gokuden were ever released outside of Japan, although Gokuden was released in 2003 for Bandai's handheld flop, the Wonder Swan Color. RIP. As the 80s gave way to the 90s, Dragon Ball slowly transformed into Dragon Ball Z. Goku had grown from a hard-headed child to a muscle-bound child, and his adventures had taken a slightly more mature tone. The Famicom was still hanging on at this point, despite the fact that its more powerful 16-bit brother, the Super Famicom, had launched in 1990. The user base for the Famicom was so enormous that Bandai kept that Dragon Ball train rolling, releasing Dragon Ball Z Kyoshu Saiyan, the Assault, the People of the Saiyan, Dragon Ball Z2 Gekishin Frieza, a fierce god Frieza, and Dragon Ball Z3 Resen Jinzo Ningen, a violent battle of artificial humans in 1990, 1991, and 1992. All 3 games kept the card battling system implemented in the previous Famicom entries, adding far more freedom to move about the sectioned overworlds and a host of elaborate battle animations. And then, it happened. Bandai finally released a Dragon Ball fighting game. Guess what? This time you had to use actual cards to play. Dragon Ball Z Gekito Tenkaichi Budokai was released at the tail end of 1992 alongside a special new Famicom peripheral, the DATAC Joint ROM system. This funky little add-on actually attached to the top of the Famicom, allowing players to scan compatible cards directly into their games. Gekito Tenkaichi Budokai locked every single fighter behind their corresponding card, meaning the game was completely unplayable without both the joint ROM system and the various fighters and item cards. The game featured roughly 30 different fighters, forcing players to scan in different versions of the same character if they wanted to play as a more powerful form. The final Dragon Ball game of the Famicom era, Dragon Ball Z Gaiden Saiyajin Zetsumetsu Keikaku, planned to eradicate people of the Seiya, was released alongside an original video animation, or OVA, of the same name. The card game featured the same card-based RPG gameplay seen many times before, and a wholly original storyline about the Z Warriors taking on a nefarious new villain named Dr. LYCHEE or LYCHEE, who is hell-bent on ridding the universe of the Saiyan race. 1992 saw the release of a Dragon Ball game for the Terebiko, which was less of a video game console and more of a home phone. The Terebiko plugged right into your TV or VHS player and allowed users to interact with special VHS tapes via its large buttons and phone attachment. In Dragon Ball Z Atsumare Goku Warudo, Dragon Ball Z Gathered Together Goku's World, players could answer trivia and help progress the plot of the Cell Saga. Ring ring. Hello? Oh, it's Cell. And he wants to kill you. At this point, Dragon Ball has already been the focus of 9 console offerings in a mere 6 years, not to mention countless LCD handhelds and whatever the hell Terebiko is. And thus, we enter the Super Famicom era. The first game to show up was a bit underwhelming, an enhanced remake of the first and second Dragon Ball Z games for the Famicom, known as Dragon Ball Z Super Saiyan Densetsu, Super Saiyan Legend. Next in the lineup was a big one. A title that remains Japan's best-selling Dragon Ball video game of all time. Dragon Ball Z Super Budoden. This classic 2D fighter pitted 13 of the series' most popular heroes and villains against each other in a variety of well-known Dragon Ball settings. And you didn't even need any cards. Wow! Unlike many fighting games of the time, Super Butoden allowed players to maneuver their fighters as far away from their opponents as they wished, even up into the sky for aerial attacks. This revolutionary feature was accomplished by splitting the screen with a colorful line when players reached a certain distance from one another. Super Butoden was followed by 3 sequels and 1 spin-off. 2 for the Super Famicom, 1 for the Sega Mega Drive home console, which you may know as the Genesis, and the final entry for the ill-fated Sega Saturn. Each game featured a tweak roster and vastly improved gameplay from the original. In a surprising move, Super Butoden 2 was released in North America and Europe in 2015 as a digital pre-order bonus for the Nintendo 3DS. By pre-ordering Dragon Ball Z Extreme Butoden, fans finally got their hands on the fighting game, a whopping 22 years later after its original launch in Japan. Strangely, the game remained in Japanese. While the Butoden series satisfied Dragon Ball fans' desire to throw down in the safety of their homes, the developers at Bandai-owned Banpresto worked tirelessly to bring the fight to the arcades. Their first title, simply called Dragon Ball Z, was housed in a unique cabinet designed by Akira Toriyama himself. The cabinet resembled a robot wearing Goku's signature orange gi and holding a large monitor, because when you're the creator of Dragon Ball, you can request things like that. Running off the Sega System 32 arcade platform, the game offered players 8 characters and a fighting experience similar to the wildly popular Street Fighter series. The Dragon Ball Z arcade game was followed by a direct sequel with the added subtitle Super Battle, expanding on the number of playable characters, including everyone's favorite, Mr. Satan? The final Dragon Ball Z arcade game of the 90s was entitled VR vs, as in Virtual Reality Versus. Though it didn't really feature any virtual reality, the game did put players over the shoulder of their favorite Z warrior to give them fighting a more immersive feel, kinda like Punch-Out, but with Goku. Aside from a new perspective, the game also pitted players against other exclusive baddies, the demon Majin Ozotto. Those who managed to best all of the fighters were also treated to this lovely tune as the credits rolled. And if at this point you're thinking, wow, that's so many Dragon Ball games, Tim. Surely that's most of the ones that never made it out of Japan. Well, I'm here to tell you that you're wrong. From 1994 and 1996 alone, there were nearly a dozen more Dragon Ball games released. This included 2 RPGs for the Game Boy, Dragon Ball Z Goku Hitsoden and Goku Gekikoden, 3 more games for the Super Famicom, Dragon Ball Z Super Gokuden Totsugeki-hen, Kaku Sei-hen, and Hyper Dimension, the first and worst Dragon Ball game for the PlayStation, Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Battle 22, and a host of other titles for home consoles you and I probably never heard of. Unless you're that one guy that knows it all, then good for you. There were the choose-your-own adventure-style games from the Bandai Playdia, which is the Dragon Ball Z Gaiden Shin Saiyajin Zetsumetsu Keikaku Chi-Kyu-hen and Uchu-hen, a Dragon Ball art design title for the Apple Pippin called Anime Designer Dragon Ball Z, and a weird strategy-based fighting game for the PC Engine, Dragon Ball Z Ira Inu Sangoku Densetsu. Oh, and another fighting game for the PlayStation and Sega Saturn called Dragon Ball Z The Legend. Now, what you have to understand is that at this point, in the latter half of 1996, that Dragon Ball, in the form of the Dragon Ball Z anime, was finally introduced to a wide North American audience. While the hype around Dragon Ball was slowly fading in Japan after the end of the anime and manga, the craze was just beginning elsewhere. The first official Dragon Ball game to be released in North America, one that hadn't been corrupted by Dragon Power, was the 1997 fighting game Dragon Ball GT Final Bout. Only around 10,000 copies of this blocky 3D fighter were produced for the North American market, as Dragon Ball's popularity was still at its infancy at the time. Surprisingly, the game was also released in the UK and other regions of Europe where Dragon Ball wouldn't be introduced until the early 2000s. It was only a year later, after Dragon Ball had found an audience, that Final Bout would be re-released in both North America and Europe. There you have it, a little sneak peek into the retro history of Dragon Ball video games. It's hard to believe that the pixelated antics of the early titles like the Famicom Shenlong no Nazo have now Super Saiyaned into high-quality hits like Dragon Ball Xenoverse and the recent fantastic Arc System Works Dragon Ball FighterZ. Not to mention, the best Dragon Ball video game of all time. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. And if you're not a paid user yet, check out the description down below and you can use the code to get 14 days free. Crunchyroll, on me. You can watch Dragon Ball Super on it. All right, bye-bye. Hey, you guys wanna see me transform into a Super Saiyan? Check this out. See you next time.